Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Tax, the show for growth-minded CPAs and real estate pros in tax. I'm TJ Sponsel. In today's episode, we will discuss people development. Joining us today on Let's Talk Tax is Sarah Turner. Sarah is the president of Lumino Leadership and specializes in developing dynamic, intuitive, and transformational leaders through customized training programs and personalized coaching. Welcome, Sarah.
It's great to be on. Thanks, TJ.
Well, I've been looking forward to this, Sarah.
Yeah.
And so for everybody listening today, is that Sarah has become part of this, has been part of this McGuire Sponsel family now for, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
We got introduced to Sarah years ago, and she has become instrumental in helping us scale our firm, mainly through the development of our young staff people. And so in talking about Let's Talk Tax, this is going to be a little different than what we usually do.
Yeah.
You know, Let's Talk Tax was created to be a technical resource for CPAs, real estate consultants, bankers across the country. Okay, and we've always come at it from a very technical. What is IC disc? Why a transfer pricing study is important? 174 and the R&D credit. Today, we're going to talk about people. And it's some of my favorite subjects. I'm a people person. And because we are all in the people business, I wanted to spend a little time with you today. And I think we're going to do maybe this over 2 parts because there's so much we can go, so many areas we can go in. Yes. Is that I wanted to spend some time today with Sarah just talking about some of the challenges people have. You know, we have the pleasure of serving over 500 CPA firms across the country. And as I look at it, yes, they have challenges in terms of making sure they do a good job for their clients and build new and better clients. But all of them, at the end of the day, the epicenter is how they deal with the people dynamic in their firm.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to spend a little time with that over these next couple podcasts to say, okay, here's some of the do's and don'ts from an expert. Full disclosure, you grew up in the Big Four before turning into it. So, Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so it is one of those things I often disclose that I am not the most natural path to becoming a leadership consultant. I started my career in public accounting. I began in the Big Four, and I was on the assurance side, so I was very mainstream external client service. But I had this natural growing passion when I got tagged to help with internal client service projects, mainly helping our people. And I found that I just kept migrating closer and closer to that space. Over time, I got a chance to do that more formally and did training, recruiting, a lot of internal, what I would call leadership curriculum development. It was fascinating. And that led me to taking a path. I eventually went external into the, what I would say, world of private accounting. So I was a controller for a while too. So I've been on both public and the corporate side. And even then, I still found myself wanting to connect with people and help other people grow. So I started becoming an adjunct professor. So in the evenings, I was a teacher. And then that led me to becoming a leadership consultant, where I will say the last 2 decades, I have gotten to work with organizations just like McGuire Sponsel on how do you take your most valuable asset and put them in the place to add the most value. No formula is exactly the same, but there are some core elements. And I think that's why it's so cool that the organization decided that on Let's Talk Tax, broaden the conversation and help those who are technically amazing resources put that technical knowledge into the most practical application of delivery so you get the value that it deserves.
Well, and don't overlook your most important role, 2 sports-minded sons also that keep you pretty busy.
Exactly right. I am a mom of 2. We have soccer and baseball prominently represented in my house. And I think it's interesting because even on the non-work side of our lives, there are constant observations of how the same skills that you need daily when you have external clients or internal clients at work, you still work those same skills outside. And I just find myself growing daily, no matter what aspect of my life you look at. So yes, that keeps me very busy.
We started out our relationship working together was that the idea because we wanted to develop leaders. Okay. Right. And selfishly, I think a lot of professional service firms don't pay attention to that until it's time for the existing leadership to want to retire or slow down or pivot to something else. We took that a little different at McGuire Sponsel, and back in 2019, we started this Leadership Academy, where we found a group of people that have proven themselves, okay, and we put them in this program led by you and coached diligently by you for a period of time. And we've done that in succeeding years, with the exception of the COVID year. Can you walk us through your experience? What's the mentality a lot of organizations have about developing leaders?
Yeah. So let's take a step back. You said something really important about when organizations typically decide it's time to invest in people. One common that I'm guaranteeing you've seen regularly with those you've overlapped with is people have gotten to a new position or a new title, and then we say, okay, you did really well as a doer. Now let's make you a leader of some sort. So whatever title you put into that place, that's when we say, okay, now I guess we should train you. And I think sometimes it becomes a backwards mentality because you get behind. You have a person who's now in a position to be something that we need from them, but we haven't taken the time to invest in them before that moment. So that's a really common response is when you get a certain title, okay, now I guess we need to train you. So that's one mentality I see often. The other is sometimes I think we think that I don't know that we need to be the ones that sponsor that. You are absolutely capable of finding your own growth path. So one of those two things is really common. What you're describing, which is something that McGuire Sponsel decided to do, was what if we were to make sure that we created an environment where we are rallying around our team, supporting their growth and development, and giving them the space to do it, and we're looking at it from all aspects. I think if you were to create a map of the employees here, they get exposed to investment in so many different ways, both technical and non-technical topics. But what was awesome when the organization decided to kind of tap on the shoulder a handful of middle core leaders and say, hey, we need you to become even more integrated into the way the leadership unfolds in the future, was super smart. And they get to experience conversations of topics that are relevant and timely. They get to share them cross-departmentally. I think that's also super important. Keeping them in one lane only sometimes limits what they get from the experience of growth. So they get to talk to peers that they don't regularly have the same function every day, but they say, hey, what's working over there? Oh, can I steal that? Hold on, let me share something that's working with me. So I think what we are seeing is that timing matters, and organizations' decisions on their responsibility to put, again, some of that effort and environment at the ready for their teams to grow becomes a decision that is very valuable and worth making.
Well, I think part of our internal discussion to get to that point, Sarah, was that we had to understand that we were good at training people. Okay, we're excellent at training people. We weren't good at developing people. And there's a distinction there. Is that we can train people to do their respective area of whether it's the R&D or cost segregation or international. We can do that. But the development piece is often the secret sauce. And in terms of those people making a distinct difference to our clients, to our alliance partners, and to our firm. And I give you a lot of credit, and I really do. I don't say that just because you're sitting here. Is that because some of those people that have gone through Leadership Academy, it has put them on a new trajectory in their careers, and we see it internally and we see it externally. I think that's the challenge is that these firms are understanding that, hey, yeah, you can train them in their billable hours, but there's this intangible factor when you start developing them that generates a tremendous ROI for the firm.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how what I often call an organization takes the shift from training to development. And I'll give you a couple of examples that you get to see because you're a part of them because the organization decided to be all in this process. It's often you take an organizational employee and you put them into a class for a half a day and you say, learn something new. But what really occurs in most environments is people leave those 4 hours and they think, that was interesting, but what's waiting on them in hour 5 of the day are the emails they didn't have a chance to even read before they got out of that training. They have voicemails or texts waiting on them, and their application of what they learned slowly peters off and they don't put it into practice. And so one of the things that we did to shift from training to development is we said, okay, you've got to be intentional about what you take out of this room. So what do? We make them come up with an action plan. And then they have to talk with an internal mentor, namely you and a number of other people who have given your time to say, why did you put that on your action plan? Have you thought about that strategically? How's that going to help other people? How's it going to help you? They get challenged in the right way to know they're going to be accountable to bring that to life. Then they have to present. They have to come up with a presentation of, tell me what you learned and present it to somebody else. Teach it. Learn it as if you're going to teach it. And when you put that along with a number of other factors in place, now I didn't just go to training for 4 hours. I have to figure out how to bring this to life.
It's the application.
Yes,
and I think that you hit spot on is that the theory is great. You go sit in those 4-hour sessions, 8-hour sessions. The theory is really good. Yeah. But the application is where you learn about it.
It is.
And and obviously we do these quarterly presentations. The Leadership Academy gives it to the shareholders, and it allows us to see them. And what a great opportunity for us to see their growth and also address some of the people that maybe aren't developing as we like to. We've spoken about this.
Yeah.
A group will present and I'll be like, wow, these two individuals did a great job, but these other two people, how can we work with them and give them timely feedback so they can make adjustments during the program so it's meaningful to them. I think that's where we're still trying to figure out as a firm. I think a lot of people that are listening to this that are owners of firms is that what is the organizational's role in the career trajectory of their employees, and what's the individual's role in their career trajectory. We set up our annual retreat and I'd say, hey, we can help you, but you've got to own this. And that's so much the challenge we have as a firm and scaling. Unique. The date today, obviously, we're shooting this podcast. It's the 10-year anniversary of us moving into this office, and that day we were 23 people in one office. Now we're 100 people spreading across 5 offices across the country. My point is, where's that breakdown? Is that, okay, we're going to create the path for you. We're going to create opportunities for you. We're going to invest, but you've got to take ownership of your career, because so many times our people are asking us, what's my opportunity? What's the vision for my role? And if we could spend all of our time just answering those questions, where the development piece allows us to have those conversations more contemporaneously.
Yeah. And you know this because you hear some of the concepts that we bring to life in some of our dialogues with the leadership discussions. One thing that we break down is everybody has we'll call it a ratio, a split of how you show up and contribute during the day. And the terminology we often use is that some things we show up, we're a doer. And we put our hands on it. We created the deliverable. It was ours to take from start to finish. If we really stay just a doer as an individual contributor, we have a cap. All of us have a capacity, so we stop. Our limitations are there. So we often challenge people, okay, how do you grow your influence? How can you create more value as a leader? If you take yourself out of that doer role, maybe you start leveraging. Okay, how do you transition to allowing other people to take some of this? Empowering, which is a key word in the culture of McGuire Sponsel, but you start asking people, how do we empower other people? It doesn't have to just be me. Then you start to grow that responsibility and you start to see people now take the things in training and put it into practice. But then we also talked about being a developer. And developers are a little bit different than delegators because they don't just give work to other people, but they also say, how can I give it to you so that one day you give it to someone? And you change the whole mentality. And if you can do that well, what you end up doing is you say, hey, we want you to not just do this daily with other people. You have to go through this process and own it yourself. Create the path, be part. So if we give you the environment as an organization, we give you the tools, we give you the conversation. Now you get empowered to bring it to life, but we are going to be on the receiving end of tell me how you did. I want an update. Let me know where I can help. And if you can create that 360 sphere of advocacy, giving them the opportunity with the tools, giving them the challenge, empowering them to bring it to life, that's their role. Then you circle back and say, tell me how it went. What would you change? Let me tell you an idea of feedback. Combined, you have ownership in both spaces. And I think when it's owned together, people grow and they know how to not only do it themselves, but they teach other people to do it too.
So here's a slippery slope of that.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, the 20-something crowd has gotten a kind of a bad rap in the workplace because there's a stigma. And I would tell you that I've seen that a little bit with some of our hires. But I would tell you the great majority of our hires are great people, and they've already made a great impact on our firm. Mm-hmm. How do you balance giving them all the tools, making this investment, and then also helping them to know some level of patience and how the evolution of their career is supposed to take place? Because I feel like there's a high level of impatience right now in our society, is we want it now, and it can be very problematic in a firm when somebody's been here 2 or 3 years, they've shown some good growth, they maybe gotten some a promotion, maybe they've gotten some bonuses, we've trained them, and now it's like, now I want everything right now. How do we balance that as a business owner to say, you've provided them all the tools, you've made this investment, and now their impatience could create some exposure for the entity?
That's a really great question. A couple of thoughts come to mind. The first one is setting really good, realistic expectations about what it looks like for growth. I think sometimes I'm in no way meaning to sound like I'm pointing a finger, but I do think sometimes people at the education level, call it university level, they have expectations that are starting to be established, not in the corporate environment, but in the academic environment. So when they come into the corporate environment, they have preconceived expectations, and sometimes they're not grounded, they're not objective, and it's important for the organization to level set and help understand what is growth. Let's define it. What does it look like? And to allow them to understand that it's a process, that it's not something that the minute you do something the first time, it must be the time when that shift happens. Sometimes it's repeating it enough that it becomes a default natural skill set. And only when that time happens, are you ready? And so that dialogue becomes really important. The other thing I think is valuable is, and this is something that the firm is exploring and I know does now, but is looking towards it as well. But making sure that not at the risk of uniformity. That's probably the word I would use. I think sometimes people assume, well, if someone else got promoted, I should too. Yep, or an organization fears, should I promote Sarah? Hold on a second. Meg's not ready and they started at the same time. So no, we shouldn't promote Sarah yet. When Meg gets ready, we'll promote them both. Or maybe even a different scenario. So being upfront, setting the expectations, but also helping realize sometimes you do have to tailor the experience as well. So it's probably a two-step process, and all of us are doing that two-step dance as organizations to figure it out.
Okay, let's go to another area that's somewhat sensitive right now across our economy for businesses.
Yeah.
Remote versus in-office, and the impact it has on culture, development, and training. You know, obviously COVID was a very tragic time in the world. It created some efficiencies in the workforce, meaning they could work from anywhere. But now that we are 3 years basically of getting back to work, I say 21, we got back, started people going back in the office.
Yeah.
What do you see in terms of organizations being able to kind of get their arms around policies, how to train people, how to set people up for success when certain people go, I'm good working from home. I feel like there's a little bit of working from home has its place, and we have people that work remote here, and they do a great job for McGuire Sponsel. But there's an element that we miss when they're not here as part of just their development and their contribution to the team. Okay. How are you seeing firms get it right, and how are you seeing firms get it wrong?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we could probably talk for 15 minutes about that, so I'll be more succinct than I'd probably like. But you hear me talk about this all the time. One key element to creating culture is figuring out the nice sweet spot for rapport. How do you build it? How do you sustain it? Who's supposed to be at the helm? Who's supposed to be contributing? How does it evolve? And one thing that's definitely true through history of human interaction is if you can have that extra value of being in person, there's just this thing you get to harness that does not exist when you are in a remote space. And so how do you replicate that? How do you put a framework around that to make sure that you can still grab that magic element that often happens only when you're in person? And I think a lot of organizations, I think McGuire Sponsel even has done a good job of this, but you work your way through. You don't assume you're going to get it right the first time. You allow iterations. That's key. But I think you also have to make sure that you put into the hands of the team the why that space in person is so valuable, and then figure out what the ratio is that helps you keep it, but also allows you to create the efficiency from some alternate arrangements. So as an example, I think you and I were just talking about this. How do you take advantage of when people are in the office to strike that magic ideal moment of the day, and you meet in the social hub and you have lunch, and the natural default is, okay, I'm in the office, so work through, head down, pencil up, when really that's the day to be connecting and finding out what's the last week been like, and tell me something you learned, and can I share something with you? And it's that space that I think sometimes people say, can you force that? I think that you can set up the structure that creates the ideal environment, but then you have to have people really go first, invite people in, show that it matters. And if leaders can be the ones that show that, model that behavior. I mean, you and I were just talking, how often do you try to eat in a social hub every week?
As much as I can.
As much as you can. And so when you do that, you're asking people for what's the update? How are things? And that sets that connection point in motion. There's also something that even when you're remote, put yourself in the virtual space, which we all are. Be intentional. I say this all the time. There's this wonderful practice that a colleague taught me called connect before content. So if you have a 30-minute meeting, can you embed 3 minutes to connect? And I often come up with a way to do that. You come up with one question, one fact question. All right, here's a question. Here's one you just recently maybe heard me use. I use this one in the MSLA team. Oldest living relative in your history. Everybody go. And just, I was watching a show on centurions, and it was so interesting, and I wanted to know the room's climate. And it took us 3 minutes, and everybody told me their oldest living relative in their history, and we chuckled about it. And I learned something about them, and then we went right into, okay, what's the content for the other 27 minutes? And if you can find a balance between creating and sustaining, getting to know each other and building rapport, while not eclipsing the value of the work itself, They can both be done. I think sometimes people feel like you have to give up one to have the other, and you don't. You just have to be really intentional to think about what the formula is going to look like for your team.
I think oftentimes the word I think of when I think of development, it brings dimension to the person, and it brings dimension to the firm. And I think one thing that I've learned over the past year, now that we have the offices across the country, and we obviously have Phoenix, which is sometimes the part of the year it's 3 hours, and sometimes it's 2 hours behind Atlanta, Indianapolis, and Detroit. And the one thing that I've learned is that email communication is very effective, but sometimes picking up the phone and talking through a solution brings a lot of dimension to the conversation and to the issue at hand. Other thing I've learned as part of development is always explain the why.
Yeah.
And I think we as leaders sometimes don't do a good job of explaining the why. Is that we don't have a great awareness of our presence, and we walk in and say, "This is what we want." You and I were just part of a conversation with our leadership academy today, and we were talking about, sometimes as accountants and engineers and lawyers, which is what this firm's made of, we just want to go to the right answer, find the right answer, give me the data to prove it. And sometimes in development, it's experience. It's not in a textbook. But what's imperative on leaders is that we've got to explain the why. Here's why we're doing this. Here's something I see that I experienced 18 years ago when I got into this crazy, or 19 years ago when I got into this crazy business. That caused some bruising. I don't want this bruising for you. Here's the why we're going to do this, and not just giving them the answer. And I think leadership having awareness of the opportunities to develop and explain the why is, that 1 + 1 = 3 on that deal.
Yeah.
Is if we can bring the why in terms of here's why we're doing this.
Yeah. Well, and we talk a lot about how talking about the why sets in motion part of the logic, but it also draws me into it. Now I understand it more. I am much more likely to rally around that. And so something as big as shifting to an alternate work environment, like work from home, you have to help people understand the structure, what it can bring, why we want to connect, why we want to make those calls, why we want to skip emails sometimes. And once you kind of celebrate those two, so you don't just set up the expectations, but when we're doing it well, we have to say, oh my gosh, that was the moment, right? Okay, we got to get more of those. And you find people, again, they end up following that lead, and it becomes a cultural element that's true about your organization.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, we're going to cut it off right there because we got part 2 coming up.
Sounds good.
But I know we got a time limit here. So,
Okay.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Sounds good.
Thanks for tuning in today. Remember to subscribe to Let's Talk Tax podcast channel on YouTube to be notified and receive all new episodes.